Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge, and today I'm joined with Pat Fitzmaurice from Fantasy Pros and Nick Whalen from Footballguys. We're going to be diving into some player takes today and talking about some guys that you should be targeting as some under-the-radar players for your fantasy football drafts. Additionally, we're going to talk about some guys who have a chance of rushing for 800 yards or more at the quarterback position, some tight ends who could possibly lead their team in targets, and at the end of the show, we're going to have a really fun game of Keep, Trade, Cut, focused on some NFC North players. This is a fantastic episode, so be sure to check out this week's show of The Launchpad. Who is a quarterback outside of the top 12 that you cannot stop drafting? That and so much more on today's episode of The Launchpad. Pat, go ahead and start us off. Who do you keep drafting that is not being drafted as a QB1?
I'm typically getting someone in that QB1 range, so in 2 QB leagues and Superflex, pretty much anything with like a deep bench. I'm getting a lot of Jared Goff. That's probably going to sound a little strange to have like a soft spot for Jared Goff, but man, I just kind of like his situation. Really good offensive line, one of the better ones in the league. Very nice set of pass catchers. And this is a guy who, for the Rams, like a couple of years, averaged around 290 passing yards a game, so it's not like he's a complete schlub in deeper leagues where you need to have one of those lower run quarterbacks. He's kind of been my guy.
Yeah, and you know, we hear it all the time with Jared Goff that he's just kind of a punching bag for so many issues in the NFL, but this guy's just a few years away from making a Super Bowl run, and granted, it was with a very different team, but we know that he can be a competent guy and finish inside the top 12, especially if he's surrounded by those weapons, so I love that call out. But Nick, same question over to you. Who's a guy that's being drafted outside of the top 12 quarterbacks that you continue to draft this year?
Yeah, this one might be a little controversial, but it's Deshaun Watson. And I know it's been so long since we've talked about actual playing football with Deshaun Watson, but last time he played, he led the NFL in passing yards, in yards per attempt. He was 5th in fantasy in most formats. He ran for over 400 yards in 3 straight years. Like, we talk about those Konami code quarterbacks and being good on a really bad team. He did all those things. And if I can get him later, and, you know, depending on how your quarterbacks are set up, it's super flex, 2 quarterback, 1 quarterback. If I can get one of those guys that can give me, even if he plays half the year and even half those games are top 5 performances, that's really going to give me a boost in points to really help me win some games and maybe a championship.
That's how I'm looking at it too. I mean, as soon as I get past like the Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford tier, I'm okay taking Deshaun Watson even if he only plays half of a season because of that upside. That being said, for the audience that is watching or listening to the show right now, we are recording this August 17th, Wednesday in the late afternoon, early evening. So who knows what can change by the time the show comes out on Friday afternoon. We saw that they're having some settlement discussions now, so you know, by the time the show airs on Friday, we could have a full year suspension. We could have nothing. Who knows how that take will age, but we have a ton that we're going to get into today. So let's go ahead and get into some introductions really quickly, and then we can do that. I want to thank everybody for tuning into episode 42 of The Launchpad, now on all Footballguys channels. So you can search it, Footballguys, on anywhere a podcast is found and find this show. Last week, I was joined with Scott Pianowski and Alfredo Brown. We were talking about some ambiguous wide receiver rooms. And today, I am joined by Pat Fitzmaurice and Nick Whalen, and we are going to dive into some player takes and hopefully help you win your fantasy league by just diving deep into some rosters and some players that you should be targeting. Before we do that, though, Pat, you're over at Fantasy Pros now, absolutely crushing it with the podcast. You're doing the primer over there as well. I know that we are just a couple of weeks from things getting really, really busy, but I appreciate you making the time today. Let everyone know where they can find you on social media and what you're going to be working on during the season.
Oh, thanks, Dave. People can find me on Twitter at Fitz_FF. I'm going to be doing the weekly Fitz on Fantasy podcast, occasional appearances on the flagship Fantasy Pros podcast, and I think I'm doing a weekly tiers article. Dave, please don't try to saddle me with the primer again. Derek Brown has taken that one over for me this year, so you know, that's 15,000 words less that I have to write a week, and you know, grateful for that.
Yeah. I'm sorry to be putting that on your plate. Hopefully Friedman isn't watching this and saying that, well, Dave said it, so now you got to write it, because that was a beast of an article. And then in the middle of the screen, I'm joined with Nick Whalen over at Footballguys, now one of our newer additions over here, but somebody that I've been connected with for a long time now, consider a good friend, has some awesome takes, and we might, you know, I'm not going to try to promise anything here, but Nick and I are both Bears fans. Pat's a Packers fans. It might get a little bit chippy at some point in this show, but Nick, go ahead and introduce yourself. Same thing. Let everyone know where they can find you on social media and what you're going to be working on this offseason and during the season.
Yeah, on Twitter @_ Nick Whalen. The actual @Nick Whalen had like 6 tweets, I think, and I could never get the handle. So I'm underscore on almost all social medias. But yeah, I'll be at Footballguys in terms of just content. And then I also have a YouTube channel, and I plan on doing a lot of video stuff there in terms of just actual film and understanding football. I think that's a piece that people could value, and hopefully they'll help their fantasy teams too.
And that's what I love about Footballguys is just the eclectic group of people we have. You got Adam Harstead, who is looking at everything through an Excel spreadsheet and just putting out phenomenal data-based articles. And then we've got people like you and Matt Waldman, who take a film and a coaching approach to this. And it just really, what we're going to do is give you the information and help you come to a decision. But ultimately, it is up to you to make those decisions. So if you see some conflicting player takes on Footballguys, don't be surprised. Everybody looks at the game through a very different lens, but that's what makes it so fun. But let's go ahead and dive right in. We talked about quarterbacks already that are ranked outside of the top 12. I thought that would be a layup question for running backs, so we're going to expand that a little bit outside of the top 24. Nick, start us off here. Who is a running back that you find yourself consistently drafting outside of the top 24 this year?
Yeah, it's Ramondre Stevenson, which, talking back to film, that's a guy I didn't really like out of college. I thought he was a little overhyped, and I just liked what I saw last year. And then when you keep adding in the offseason and everything else that we've been hearing, everything we've been seeing, maybe Damian Harris gets traded. We know the James White retirement, which is sad because I really liked him as a player. Another Wisconsin guy there, Pat. But if he does get the pass catching role, and depending on your format last year, he was borderline RB2 anyway, he really could jump up, and it really beat his ADP just from he gets goal line carries and pass catching. If he only splits with Damian Harris, I think he's really going to pay off.
Yeah, and I think that James White retiring was kind of the best case scenario for both of these guys, because I think if James White was there, I was kind of confused when they re-signed him. 30 years old, coming off a pretty severe hip injury. I would have been shocked to see him make a full recovery. But my fear was that it would just be a really gross committee where James White is taking the passing down work and early down and goal line work is split between Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris. But now I think that we have a much clearer picture where that early down and goal line work is going to be Damian Harris's, like it was last season. And then Ramondre Stevenson profiles so well to fit in that pass catching role. So sad to see James White go, but like I said, best case scenario for both of these running backs. Same question over to you, Pat. And if you got anything that you want to add about these running backs, feel free. But if not, who's a running back that you are drafting outside of the top 24?
Well, I love the Ramondre call. He's been a guy I've been going after and have ahead of Damian Harris. And just like the idea of him as the pass catching back would be kind of fun because he's this burly dude, but he's got quick feet and pretty good hands. So I think he could pull it off and get a little of the early down work too. And you've got a really potentially valuable guy in what should be like a ball control offense. But for me, it's Miles Sanders. The hate for Miles Sanders is just overwhelming sometimes on Twitter. Like, people can't stand him. I know he kind of burned some people last year, which happens when you don't score any touchdowns. But obviously he's due a little bit of regression in that area. I'm not sure if I buy this Kenneth Gainwell as goal line back thing. Like, that's a pretty small goal line back. Maybe it happens, or maybe someone else works into that role besides Miles Sanders. But, Sanders is maybe disappointed a little as a pass catcher, but I think he's been a pretty efficient runner for the most part. It certainly helps to have Jalen Hurts back there, and, maybe with the threat of him running, freezing linebackers for a split second longer and widening some of those holes. I hate to point yards per carry as evidence of anything, but Miles Sanders has been pretty efficient in that category, always around the 5.0 mark. So the main thing, I want running backs who run behind good offensive lines, and he's running behind maybe the best offensive line in the NFL.
So I don't want to push back too hard, Pat, but I just want to pick your brain a little bit here. So, just kind of the way that I'm projecting this Eagles offense to work out a little bit, I see Miles Sanders getting the early down work. And you talked about Kenneth Gainwell possibly taking the goal line work. I don't know if he's going to do that, but I think that he does take the passing down work because he was really good in that aspect last year. He was 6th overall in yards per route run as a running back, which is pretty impressive. And then I think my big fear is we already saw it last year with no touchdowns from Miles Sanders. And I think that was because of Jalen Hurts. You know, Jalen Hurts kind of has that penchant for running near the goal line, similarly to Josh Allen, and how it caps the upside for Buffalo running backs. So could you see that possibly happening again, where maybe Miles Sanders, could see 150, 200 carries, but not getting the targets, not getting the goal line work?
Oh, I could for sure, but it's Sanders at cost is what I'm attracted to. There's a ceiling for sure, but I also think there's a pretty reasonably decent floor here, and he's starting to go like running back 30, pretty deep in drafts, kind of around where Ramondre Stevenson goes, it seems like these days, and I've seen Ramondre go ahead of him in some drafts, which I'm okay with that, but I don't know. I think Sanders, especially if you like to build a little like I do, where I'm kind of concerned about building up at wide receiver in the early rounds, often looking for that running back 2 in the 7th, 8th, 9th. He's kind of a guy who lands in my target zone.
Yeah, and it seems like all of the guys there are just getting pushed so far down the draft board. You talked about Ramondre Stevenson, Miles Sanders. I'll throw Antonio Gibson there as well. And these are guys where, I think we have been drafting all off season long. And it's really important to kind of take a step back and reevaluate the board, because everybody just says, I don't want Miles Sanders, I don't want Antonio Gibson. And then all of a sudden these guys are falling into the 9th and 10th round, where it's kind of worth the cost at that point. I mean, just to take the risk. So I agree with you there, Pat. Nick, I see you nodding along. Do you have anything to add about Miles Sanders?
Yeah, I got two things. I mean, he's a player that I didn't necessarily love out of college, but just like Pat said, this is a game about value and about points. And at some point, you have to take these guys because they're going to pay off and give you more points than they're liked. I guess I put that in air quotes. I know that some people will see this, some will hear it, but like, it doesn't matter if you like the player. It's about gaining points and winning. So some people like this stat, some people don't. But rushing yards over expected. So that takes into account offensive line play and defensive front and all that kind of stuff. Miles Sanders was second in the NFL last year at 0.89 positive. Every time he touched the ball, he almost gained another yard than what was expected of him. That's better than Jonathan Taylor. It's just behind Aaron Jones. So second in the whole NFL. And the other thing to give him a boost is I looked into rushing quarterbacks because we're, the Konami code, it's a big thing right now. We have never had a quarterback go back-to-back seasons with double-digit rushing touchdowns. Cam Newton has done it 3 times in his career, never back-to-back seasons. Jalen Hurts last year had 10. So history tells us here, of all of the NFL, he's probably not going to get double-digit touchdowns, which gives a little bit of boost of Miles Sanders getting at least one goal line touchdown, maybe more.
I got to hope for at least one. I will take the over on Miles Sanders one. But yeah, you guys both made a very strong case for Miles Sanders here. And this is one of those where I think I've just been fading him all off season, and I need to take a step back and kind of realize that at his current ADP, he probably is a really good value. Let's move on to wide receivers, though. And same question. I want to talk about guys that are getting drafted outside of the top 24 that you think can really, really pay off. And Pat, go ahead and start us off here. Who's a wide receiver that you continue drafting?
So I like Rashod Bateman a lot. And the depth chart kind of points to Bateman as the de facto wide receiver 1, alpha receiver for the Ravens. They really have no one else. They can't even keep their guys healthy now. I know Tylan Wallace and James Prochet are both banged up. Devin Duvernay is there too. But boy, that's like a really thin group of wide receivers after Bateman. And I don't necessarily like playing the depth chart game where the too many mouths to feed or so many available targets. I'd like to look at the talent too, and maybe Nick can speak to this because Nick's up here in Big Ten country too, and I'm sure he's seen a lot of Rashod Bateman. I loved him at Minnesota. And, as a guy who went to Wisconsin, I don't have a lot of love for many things Minnesota Golden Gophers football, but Bateman was just fantastic. And I felt like he had no real weaknesses in his game, plenty fast, and his game speed, or his speed showed up in games. Really good hands, crisp route runner, really competitive at the catch point, and tough after the catch. If he has flaws, I didn't really see him when he was, playing up at the U. So, I really like him a lot, and I think he's ready to capitalize on what should be a pretty big target share.
Well, after pushing back a little bit on Miles Sanders, I've got nothing to push back on Rashod Bateman. I am completely in lockstep with you on that one, Pat. I love me some Rashod Bateman this year. And it's kind of weird that we see so many of these guys getting really pushed up in ADP for perceived good situations with a lot of target volume. When you look at Courtland Sutton right now getting drafted in the 3rd round, I don't see much of a difference between Courtland Sutton's possibility for breaking out and Rashod Bateman's, and you can get Rashod Bateman almost 3 rounds later. So love that call. And Rashod Bateman is a guy that I've been drafting plenty of, along with my Lamar Jackson shares. Should be a fun stack to have this year. Nick, if you got anything to add about Bateman, go right ahead. If not, let's hear who you are drafting outside of the top 24 wide receivers.
Yeah, so the one thing I would add I agreed with everything you said, Pat, with Bateman. The one thing that is important to me as a coach in terms of film and watching the guy is your movements have to be purposeful. The more time that you waste, the more times your quarterback could get sacked or the safety can recover. And Bateman was very purposeful with his movements, with his releases, with his stems, with rocker steps, all that kind of stuff. And that's something that you love, even in a young receiver. So he's only going to get better, I think. And I think he's going to be one of those technicians. I mean, if you're a 6'2" receiver and you can be a technician as a route runner, I think you have a really good outcomes, even floors in terms of production in fantasy and in the NFL. So yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of him. And speaking of somebody I think that has a really high floor, as long as his ankle and foot can hold up here, is Michael Thomas. And just like my quarterback take with Deshaun Watson, I know it's been a while. Do we forget how good Michael Thomas is as an NFL player? Let me remind you, and this is just stats. This is nothing big. So when he has played 8 or more games in his entire NFL career, he's never had less than 92 receptions or 1,137 yards. And he had 3 seasons of over 100 receptions. If he's 80% of this player that just dominates and makes everybody looks silly and is very sure-handed and obviously a high producer, he's going to crush his ADP. I don't know how he's outside the top 24 when you have a dominant receiver and he's not too old, you know what I mean? And he looks good right now in terms of training camp. I think he could be a league winner.
Yeah, and people always talk about him getting old, and he's really not that old. He's the same age as Cooper Kupp, and we're drafting Cooper Kupp as, some people are taking him first overall in their drafts, in PPR drafts. So, yeah, I mean, there's obviously the concerns with the injury there, but yeah, I got nothing to push back on. I mean, if you draft Michael Thomas and he ends up being healthy and returning to form, I mean, I don't know if there's going to be a better pick in fantasy football this year than a healthy Michael Thomas in the 7th or 8th round. So completely with you there. Pat, anything to add on Michael Thomas?
Yeah, I don't know what Gene Bramall, the best fantasy doc in the game, says about Michael Thomas, but we had our in-house guy on my podcast last week, Dr. Deepak Chona, and he said he is taking the value on Michael Thomas because he has no concerns at all about his foot, and I think that's probably the main thing that was driving his value down, just because we haven't seen him on the field for so long, and people were worried that maybe the off-season reports were a little bit murky about his recovery, but now that we're getting positive feedback on the medicals for him, I think it's all systems go. And I've been trying to play catch-up in drafts. I didn't get him in any best balls at all during the season because I had those concerns too. And now it's all right, I've got to get him in a few drafts.
So some of the best advice I feel like I ever got, and this is completely unrelated to fantasy football, but somebody said, people don't remember the things you say and they don't remember the things that you do, but they remember the way that you make them feel. And I think that that's why Michael Thomas is getting drafted where he is, because people have been burned for 2 consecutive years now. Anyone who has drafted Michael Thomas remembers how much it hurts to waste a premium draft pick to get absolutely no production. So, yeah, I think that's really what it comes down to is people have been burned, they've been scorned, those scars are still fresh, and that's the only thing that is keeping Michael Thomas from being a top draft pick right now. So love that call out. And like I said, a healthy Mike Thomas could be a league winner this year. Let's move on to tight ends. And again, I'm not going to go outside of the top 24. We'll change it back to the top 12 here. I don't want to be talking about Jonnu Smith and getting too deep down the list. So Nick, start us off here. Looking at tight ends that are ranked outside of the top 12, who's your favorite guy right now?
Now, I didn't do this just for Pat, being a Bears fan and picking a Packer. But to me, I think a big thing I've focused on a lot this offseason has been focusing on opportunities and good offenses and elite quarterbacks. And Green Bay lost, 45% of their production last year. I mean, you can even go the past few years with Adams and MVS. And I mean, again, I'm not a Sammy Watkins fan. I like Dubs.
What about Travis Fulgham? Travis Fulgham just signed there a couple hours ago.
Oh man, he had that little stretch. I mean, I just don't see those guys. And we like Lazard. I think me and you have been the 2 guys pounding that table, surprisingly, as Bears fans this offseason. But he's Robert Tonyan is off the pup. He has the rapport, which we know how big that is with Aaron Rodgers. And I mean, the only other guys that have more rapport is Lazard and Cobb. And Cobb's done. He is what he is. He's more of a team guy at this point. And so if you're looking for a tight end to produce big, who's done it before, I know people are gonna be like, well, he's tight end dependent. Well, Rodgers throws a lot of touchdowns. So it's not like it's gonna go down, but now the opportunity's there to get more of those receptions, targets, yards. I have him ranked high all offseason, and I'm wondering what I'm missing out on here, because to me, I just see, okay, this fits this, and he's done it before, so why would he not do it again?
Yeah, and I wrote an article about Aaron Rodgers, and first of all, hat tip to you, Nick. I know that you are a big Bears fan, but I think that it gives you a little bit of credibility when you can objectively, say that you're feeling good about Packers players. Makes you a better analyst, in my opinion. So hat tip to you. But yeah, I just wrote an article that Aaron Rodgers has been significantly better without Devontae Adams over the last couple of years, ever since Matt LaFleur showed up. And we know that the Matt LaFleur offense, he comes from the Shanahan coaching tree, and they have these really creative ways to get players open in space. And when he wasn't just looking at Adams as that first primary read and forcing the ball to him 9 or 10 times a game, he was able to run a very good offense. His passer rating was better. His touchdown rate was better. His interceptions were down. And it's not just a small sample size. I'm not looking at 1 or 2 games here. It was 8 games. So we're looking at almost, a full half season where he was averaging over 50 yards more per game without Devontae Adams than with him since Matt LaFleur showed up. And I mean, obviously, the extrapolation here is a little wild, but it would have been a 50-0 touchdown to interception ratio in those games as well. So, I mean, I don't think that that's what Aaron Rodgers is going to go out and do. But at the same time, knowing the type of person Aaron Rodgers is, having a career year would not surprise me one bit. Everybody's doubting him. He's going to have that chip on his shoulder. I could see him going scorched earth, throwing 45, 50 touchdowns this season, and somebody in Green Bay is going to have to catch him. So why not Tunyon? I'm with you there, Nick. Pat, who is the guy that you think, before we hear your guy, who do you think is going to be the guy that's going to step up and really see a decent target share or a lot of touchdowns in Green Bay?
So for touchdowns, it wouldn't shock me if they didn't have anyone over like a 750 receiving yards. I think it's going to be a split pie, very much so, and I think we could see a lot of different players chime in on that, and I think it's going to be a really good receiving year for Aaron Jones. We've seen in the games you talked about, Dave, where Devontae Adams hasn't played, and I think there were like 7 such games during his career in Green Bay. Like Aaron Jones averaged, I think, 7 targets a game in the non-Devontae Adams games, and put up some pretty eye-popping pass catching numbers. And like he's not just a flare out guy. Like he's a guy who can run wheel routes and patterns to get downfield. So I think he's in for a nice year as a pass catcher. So, and I like
also run between the tackles too. People never talk. Everyone always talks about Aaron Jones's pass catching upside, but I mean, he is slippery,
right.
strong. He's got great balance. He can do everything. I mean, he is Kamara light. There's nothing that he can't do on the field.
Yeah, but I know both of you guys have been in on Lazard, and I don't know if Lazard has like 80 catch, 1,000-yard upside, but we do know it's almost been a running joke with Packers fans that our goal line back the last couple of years has been Devontae Adams. Yep. Rodgers loves throwing near the goal line, and I mean, Allen Lazard is huge. He is a giant, so it would not surprise me at all if he had 700 yards, but like 8, 9, 10 touchdowns this year. Like I would probably put my money on him leading the team in touchdown catches. But Tunyon's a really good call too, and I just grabbed him with like the second to last pick in a Kings Classic draft in Canton. I agree, and it's great that he's off PUP. That's a good sign. Again, there's probably not big yardage upside there, but there's definite touchdown upside.
And the last thing I'll say about Tunyon is I really like him in best ball leagues where you don't have to worry about setting a lineup, because it's one of those where I don't know if you'll ever really feel confident plugging Tunyon into your lineup, because he's going to have those games where he's going to have 2 catches for 15 yards and no touchdowns. But when you don't have to worry about putting him in your lineup and you're in best ball scoring, when he does have that game where he goes for 85 yards and 2 touchdowns, boom, you just got a Travis Kelce-esque week out of Robert Tunyon, a guy that you drafted in the 18th round of your draft. So really like that talk there. That was good stuff. But Pat, who is the tight end that you continue drafting that's being ranked outside of the top 12 right now?
It's Noah Fant, and I think it's gotten to the point where he's like my most drafted tight end, because in any situation where I punt tight end, he routinely falls outside the top 12, sometimes outside the top 15, and he's already established a pretty good floor, I think, while playing with terrible quarterbacks, which, unfortunately he is continuing to be tethered to Drew Lock, but he's been tight end 8 and tight end 12 in his first 2 years in the league. And we often see tight ends struggle to find their footing in the NFL and not really hit their stride until their third, fourth year. Well, he's getting into that prime time. And we know, like, athletically, he is just off the charts as far as speed score, burst score, catch radius, all that. Like, he has all that good stuff. But I really think he's getting knocked by drafters because of who he's playing with at quarterback. Understandable, but if he's already established this safe floor, I don't mind taking him as the guy where I feel pretty comfortable that we're going to get like a base level of performance from him. So again, and I realize that playing with Geno Smith and Drew Lock will lower the ceiling somewhat, but I feel pretty good about the floor.
Yeah, I mean, if only we knew what Noah Fant could possibly do with Drew Lock. I mean, it's not like we haven't seen this before. He put up tight end 1 numbers, so why not? And for people that are unaware, you talked about the measurables a little bit, but let me just go ahead and rattle this off. I'm just going to give you the player profile or spotlight real quickly. First of all, this guy is 6'4", 250 pounds. His best comp coming out of college was George Kittle, 40-yard dash, 98th percentile. His speed score, size adjusted, 97th percentile. His burst score, 97th percentile. Agility score, 96th percentile. And his catch radius is in the 99th percentile. So like you said, off the charts across the board. This guy does not have a defect in his athletic profile. So really obvious, just envisioning the ceiling that Noah Fant could have this year. Now let's pivot a little bit. We're talking about all these different positions, but let's go back to running backs. And I want to talk specifically about some handcuff running backs and guys that you find yourself drafting quite a bit. And, that the term handcuff is really vague because there are some guys like A.J. Dillon, who is technically a handcuff, but is probably going to get enough work that you can start him really weekly. And then you got guys like Alexander Madison, who probably aren't even going to sniff the field unless Dalvin Cook gets injured. So we got a little bit of, we can play with this word a little bit and make whatever you want of it. But, Pat, go ahead and start us off. Who is a guy that you consider to be a handcuff that you are drafting frequently this year?
So it's a guy who I think is a handcuff, and the people who get the guy in front of him might be motivated to buy. But he also has some stand-alone value, and it's Tony Pollard. And for me, he wouldn't be a true handcuff because I would not be drafting the guy that he is behind. I'm just not interested in Ezekiel Elliott, who hasn't really given us any magic since 2019. Pollard is just... We've seen him. He looks like he's been shot out of a cannon pretty much every time he gets the ball. And it seems like he gets the ball on a pretty good percentage of his snaps. Like, he probably is only playing like 33%, 35%, 37% snap shares most weeks. But he still gets the ball quite a bit. We know he's good in the receiving game. And my only hope is that if he ever does get a bigger role, sometimes like I kind of see a guy like Pollard as like a Major League Baseball relief pitcher where he can come in and pump 100-mile-an-hour fastballs because he's only pitching 1 inning. Whereas Zeke, maybe can't do that and run with his hair on fire every carry because he's got to, handle 20, 25 touches a game. So I don't know what it would look like if Zeke missed time. He didn't miss any games last year. But, Pollard's a guy. And in offense, I still generally am pretty high on. There's a base level of standalone value. I think you could flex him and feel pretty good about it. And if anything happened to Zeke, obviously Pollard gains just tremendous value.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine what Pollard could do with 250, 300 touches over the course of a season. We just see him in these small sample sizes where, like you said, he's explosive. And, you didn't even mention it, but now with Amari Cooper gone and with Michael Gallup nursing an injury and now James Washington out for the entire year, I'm not sure if you saw the report, but Tony Pollard is getting snaps out of the slot right now in camp. So even if Zeke is 100% healthy, which he has been pretty much his entire career, even if he's on the field, don't be surprised to see 2-back sets or seeing Tony Pollard lined up in the slot. They're going to find ways to get him the ball just because of how depleted they are right now. You've got CeeDee Lamb, Dalton Schultz, and then most people probably couldn't even name another pass catcher on Dallas. I mean, Tony Pollard could very well be third on this team in targets this year. So love that call out. Nick, same question over to you, though. Who's a guy that is pegged as a handcuff that you find yourself drafting quite a bit?
And FYI, that expected yards per carry, Pollard was 5th in the NFL last year, which I know he's been crushing like every metric, but that's just another one. A hat tip there to you, Pat.
And the one that doesn't show up on the stat sheet either is his kick return ability. I mean, you watch this guy when he gets the ball in his hands on a kick return or a punt return. I mean, he is just the fastest guy on the field. He's sparked up. He looks fantastic out there.
Mm-hmm. So mine is a little bit of a deeper sleeper. So you have to have some more bench spots here than your short leagues here. It's Tristan Ebner, and this isn't based off of Chicago's one preseason game. Which, if you did watch it, you saw the playmaker that is Tristan Ebner. That me and shout out to Derek Brown have been preaching and pounding the table all off season for. And I know people are going to say that, Nick, this is because you don't like David Montgomery. That's partially true. I don't like him, but also he's not a fit in this offense. In the outside zone scheme, you look at Elijah Mitchell, et cetera. Look at the speed and the quickness that the types of backs in outside zone need to be. And that's not what David Montgomery is. He's more of a inside zone, between the tackle type of guy. Now, can he do it all? Does he try hard? Yes, but he doesn't fit this scheme. And when you get a new regime that comes in, coach, GM, and they bring in one running back and he fits the scheme, and he catches the ball really well to the tune of he was in the top 4 in yards per route run in the country. I'm sorry, the top 11 in that category in the country for 4 years in a row. He's the best pass catcher on the team. So right there, he has that. He has the athleticism, and he's 206 pounds. So I know people are like, oh, well, he's like this little 190-pound guy. No, that's not what he is. He has the size. And when you put all those things together and you put together that Montgomery's been really inefficient throughout his career, and they're not married to him. We look at these, oh, well, maybe Antonio Gibson might lose his job. No one's talking about David Montgomery. I know we love Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert does not catch the football well. He dropped a couple in the preseason game. He's always been that. I like him, but I think Ebner could have standalone value as a pass catcher and sneaky value as getting a bunch of carries here that could really help fantasy teams. Now, I'm not saying he's going to blow up me Elijah Mitchell, but he could be that flex guy for you. He could be that guy that fills in for you because when you catch the ball, you get a lot of fantasy points.
Yeah, I got no knock there. Tristan Ebner wasn't a guy that I really knew too much of until I saw you and Deebo just pounding the table for this guy in the offseason, took a little look at him, was pretty happy to hear that the Bears ended up getting him late in the draft because this guy is oozing with talent. So very excited what he can do. And you and I share a lot of the same sentiments when it comes to Montgomery. He's a guy that kind of does everything okay, but doesn't do anything exceptionally well. And I just don't think that he's a fit in this offense either. So I am with you there. Now, I got another question. We talked about some wide receivers that are getting drafted outside of the top 24, and I'm going to pose a similar question, but kind of different. So just try to follow my train of thought here. I want to talk about a guy who is getting drafted as his team's wide receiver 3. So, looking at where there's a very clear-cut number 1 and number 2 option on the team. Who's a guy that we think is being slept on, being drafted as the team's wide receiver 3 that you think has a chance to lead his team in targets? Nick, go ahead and start us off here.
Yeah, wide receiver 3 or later, I got Rondale Moore with the Cardinals. And part of that is easy because, Hopkins is suspended. I know we get that. And I know Hollywood Brown knows Kyler Murray. But also one thing we're missing out on here, besides most players improve the most between their rookie and their second year, and that's where Moore is he's getting snaps outside and in the slot this year. It's not just a slot guy and getting, all of his targets. I know the joke behind the line of scrimmage for him, but getting snaps outside, I think is going to keep him on the field and get him some targets. But I have this really deep love for Rondale Moore, and it's because years ago after his freshman year at Purdue, I got to talk to his position coach at a coach's clinic. And I'll try and make it quick, but basically I wanted to know how good he was. And he told me after Purdue beat Ohio State, which if you've never seen that game and highlights, Rondale Moore as a freshman was the best player on the field, which that's saying a lot because it's Ohio State, And after that game, being a freshman, you win you're the star of the show. He was looking at film and texting his coach at like 11 o'clock or midnight, talking about how he could be a better blocker on a play, not just, out partying, out, celebrating, which I would have done, I couldn't have done that, but that's just how he's wired. So if he's wired that way all of these years, and I know he got dinged up in college, how is he not going to have that work ethic to improve here and has this opportunity now, in my opinion, to get some targets that are available to him? And we've seen him flash as his rookie year. If he can stay healthy, I think he could do it.
Yeah. And the parallels, and I don't want people to, take this. I'm sure this is going to get clipped by somebody and, paint me out to be a hot take guy. But really what I see are a lot of parallels to Deebo Samuel and how the fantasy community looked at Deebo Samuel. They said, hey, he's just kind of this gadgety player, really low ADOT. You're kind of an extension of the run game. And then this year, he just turned into a bona fide alpha receiver and was able to win anywhere on the field. And that's kind of what Deebo Samuel was for his first couple of years in the league. He wasn't really doing much downfield. They had to manufacture these touches for him. But at the end of the day, just a really good football player, and they are going to find ways to get the ball in his hands, especially with DeAndre Hopkins missing early in the season. So love that call out. Rondale Moore is a guy that, I've been drafted a lot just because I love Kyler Murray this year. And he's a guy that is one of the cheapest options you can get in the passing game that I think has an insanely high ceiling that people have just kind of forgot about after a disappointing rookie season. So love that. And Pat, I see you nodding along a little bit. Are you on the Rondale Moore train?
Oh, big time. I'm such a Rondale truther. I mean, I fell in love with him. That freshman season at Purdue was just such an eye-opener. Like, you couldn't be up here in Big Ten country and not take notice of what he was doing. And that Ohio State game, my goodness, he just pretty much beat them single-handed. Like, just put Purdue on his back in that game. And hilarious that he was looking for ways to do more in that game. In an A++ game, concerned about things he might not have done well. That's incredible. So yeah, I'm really excited about him too. He's just such a little.
As like a 5'6", 18-year-old.
Yeah,
he
exactly.
was just a teenager, just destroying the Big Ten. I mean, it was unbelievable what he did as a freshman.
I know, and we've only seen 1,000-yard season in the Super Bowl era from a receiver under 5'9". It was Richard Johnson with the Lions in I think 1989. But man, if I was going to put money on anyone to break that, I think it would be Rondale Moore to be the number 2 in that category.
I'm just going to say, I think Tyreek Hill fudged his numbers a little bit at the combine because, you look at that guy standing next to some other players, Steve Smith, Tyreek Hill. I think they might have, been up on their tiptoes or doing something when they got measured at the combine. But Pat, same question over to you here. Who's a guy that's being drafted as his, perceived as his team's wide receiver 3 that you think could lead the team in targets?
All right, well, I'm going to cheat and say Christian Watson because he's now going behind Romeo Doubs in high-stakes drafts and everything. And, out of sight, out of mind, I get it. While Doubs was, catching attention in training camp practices and everything, Watson was sidelined. But we're still talking about a guy, and my guess is that it's going to take Watson some time to find his footing because he's raw, played against a lower level of competition, didn't catch a lot of passes or see a lot of targets in college, but the dude's 6'4" with sub 4.4 speed. So I mean, there's a chance, now that he's like back in practice and has some time still to get acclimated with Aaron Rodgers, that he could come on pretty quickly.
Yeah, don't hate that call out at all, just because of how wide open it is in Green Bay. And I'm not a huge fan. I mean, I'm just looking at the state of the Packers. I mean, it seems like they always make these really head-scratching decisions. We saw Jordan Love in the first round a few years ago, and then this year, with all of these very polished receivers in the draft. Like, you could have drafted a Chris Olave or a Garrett Wilson that would have immediately been the wide receiver 1 there, but instead they don't use either of their first-round picks on a wide receiver, and then they take arguably the rawest, most unpolished player in the draft. Kind of a head-scratching decision, but that's what Green Bay does, and it seems to work out for them.
George Pickens would have looked pretty good in green and gold. Let's just say that.
I don't think there's a jersey that George Pickens wouldn't have looked good in. I mean, Bears fan. I'm just going to put on my Bears hat for a second here. I mean, the Bears desperately needed a wide receiver 1, and I just can't think about how great Pickens would have looked across from Mooney. And I like Kyler Gordon, I like Jaquan Brisker, but drafting both of those guys, passing on George Pickens twice in the second round is mind-blowing. And now the reviews coming out of camp about Pickens, I mean, it's I'm excited to see what this guy can do on an NFL field, that's for sure. But like the Watson call out for sure. And Nick, I know you pointed out that he is now off the pup. So gives him a few weeks to get up to NFL speed, which shouldn't be much of an issue for him. Next question I want to talk about. Obviously, we've got a very clear-cut tier of elite tight ends this year. And these are guys that are probably going to lead their team in targets. I'm talking about Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, Darren Waller, George Kittle. Darren Waller, maybe on the fence with Devontae Adams coming back, but I'll throw him in there because he is still getting drafted as an elite tight end. But we see it time and time again. If a tight end is able to lead his team in targets, it is almost guaranteed that he's going to give us a top 3 finish. So outside of these top 5, who's a guy that you think could lead his team in targets? Pat, go ahead and start us off here.
Your guy Cole Kmet from the Bears. I really think he's going to be number 2 in the pecking order, and if it's not Mooney, it's probably going to be Kmet, who I really like, and have been drafting pretty aggressively all off season.
Yeah, and doesn't have the athletic profile to have a huge ceiling or anything like that, but reminds me a lot of TJ Hawkinson last year and what really drew people to TJ Hawkinson. I mean, this guy's probably going to see 100 targets at a minimum, could get up to that 125 threshold. And what we've seen over the last 10 years is if a tight end is able to draw 125 targets, has a 93% hit rate as finishing as a top 3 tight end. So the possibility is there for Cole Kmet to have a very, very big season. But he's one of those guys who has just seen a meteoric rise in ADP. I mean, he was getting drafted as a tight end 18 or 19 a few months ago. Now you got to pay up, tight end 10, tight end 11. He's really been moving up the board. But Nick, same question to you. Who is a tight end outside of the elite tier that you think could lead his team in targets?
Yeah, I like the Kmet call. And, Tunyon, I mean, he would be one too. But I'm going to use another one and say Dalton Schultz. And him and Tunyon, kind of similar situations where you have opportunity because there's no Amari Cooper. And again, if people forgot, Dallas was the #1 offense in the NFL last year. There's no Amari Cooper now. And, they're trying to put Pollard in the slot, et cetera. There are targets to be had. And we already saw Dalton Schultz eat last year. So why wouldn't he do even better this year? And that's an opportunity. Now, again, I know Lamb is there, so, and I like him, and he's probably going to see like 200 targets this year. But I think Dalton Schultz has a really, really good chance of being a top 3 tight end this year.
Yeah, I mean, this, can either of you name who the tight end 2 is on Dallas? Because I just had to look it up. I looked it up.
Jake Ferguson.
It is Jake Ferguson. Yeah.
Boom, Wisconsin. Yes.
How many targets are going Jake Ferguson's way? I mean, Dalton Schultz might not take a snap off this season. He might not be on the field for every single play. So, like that call out, absolutely. Now, the last thing I'll talk about before we get into a fun little NFC North, ribbing on each other a little bit. The last thing I want to talk about are quarterbacks who have a realistic shot of rushing for 800 yards or more. That is a very high benchmark to clear. And obviously, we know Lamar Jackson can do it, but I think there might be some sleepers this year that have that rushing upside, and we know what rushing upside can do for a quarterback's fantasy production. So, Pat, start us off here. Who are the quarterbacks that you think realistically could rush for 800 or more yards this season?
I'm going to say Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, who did it 2 years ago, Jalen Hurts, Trey Lance, Justin Fields. That's probably the 5.
Yeah. So, We can talk about this a little bit more, but Nick, let me get your guys first. Is there anybody that you are adding or taking off of that list?
I'm going to take Jalen Hurts off that list. I think that they want to try and make him a little bit more of a passer. And here's something interesting too. While we talk about the numbers and people trying to project things, there's been 9 instances in NFL history of a quarterback rushing for 800 yards or more. Only 9 times. So we want to put all these guys in. It's like, Lamar did it twice. Vic did it twice. Kyler, as you had said, Pat did it once. Russell Wilson did it once. We all remember that 1 year of Robert Griffin III. Randall Cunningham and Bobby Douglas, an old bear, did it. So that's it. So it's a tough. Now I know we're shifting and we're trying to get more corrects running, but also we want to protect them, and that's important. So I think maybe that 600 to 750 yards is going to be where a lot more of these guys land than these big numbers.
Yeah, and this is absolutely, we're looking at the high end range of outcomes here, best case scenario. But let's talk about this a little bit. I mean, obviously the 2 that I think everybody is kind of in agreement. We've seen Kyler do it. We've seen Lamar do it. Jalen Hurts is kind of right at that cusp. So talking about Trey Lance and Justin Fields a little bit. These guys I think have pretty similar rushing upside. Pat, can you talk us through a little bit how you're kind of ranking these guys and what the big deciding factors are and any sort of gap that you have?
So I've got Trey Lance QB8, and I've been getting him a lot. I'm really high on him. Like we saw him in his 2 starts, run 24 times last year, and I think it's going to be a work in progress with him in the passing game. It will help that he's got Deebo and Kittle and Ayuk as his 3 primary receivers. But there are going to be times where he's confused by what he sees, but I don't necessarily mind that as a fantasy manager because when he's confused, he's just going to take off and run. That's like what young mobile quarterbacks do, and I think it's going to lead to substantial rushing value. I'd be surprised if he played 15 games and finished with under 700 rushing yards. And I think Fields has that upside too. And there was someone, I think it was Andrew Cooper. I was on a podcast with him, and he dropped a stat about Getsy, like the last time Getsy was calling plays in college. where was it, Mississippi State maybe, and the rushing stats
8
there,
years ago.
quarterback. Yeah, just put up
Nick
like
Fitzgerald?
crazy. Yes, it was Nick Fitzgerald. Thank you. I wouldn't have gotten that. Very good call, Nick. Yeah, and he put up just insane rushing numbers that year. So maybe that's a positive sign that Fields is going to. But like we saw Fields, like he is mobile and like he's a tough guy to catch. I obviously wish, well, as a Packers fan, I don't wish for it too much, but I wish he had more around him. But maybe because the line is so shaky that he's going to have to run for his life a little bit, and maybe that'll lead to some rushing numbers.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at my best ball exposure, the guys that I've been drafting all offseason through over 500 best ball drafts, those 5 guys are my top 5 drafted. I mean, I just want guys that are going to have, the possibility to just break fantasy football with that rushing upside. So let's go ahead, though. I got a fun little game plan that we can talk about here, talking about some NFC North stuff. We're going to do a little bit of keep, trade, cut, and we're going to do these starting by positions. So let's start off with quarterbacks, and Nick, you can fire off first. Keep is obviously the guy that you like best. Trade is the guy that you like second best. Cut is the guy that you want nothing to do with. And let's look at some of these quarterbacks here. I omitted Jared Goff because I think that he is just the cut candidate for everybody. So Aaron Rodgers, Justin Fields, Kirk Cousins in fantasy football. Keep, trade, cut, go. How are you ranking these guys?
Oh my gosh, do I have to do this? This is being recorded. Is this terms of value just finish?
How you would be drafting these guys in fantasy football?
Okay,
Sorry to do it to you, Nick.
I will keep Fields because I just love the rushing upside. I will trade Rodgers. I won't be that bad of a homer. And then I'll cut Kirk Cousins, which it's a new offense. Everyone expects it to be better. It could be worse.
Everybody is ignoring the downside. They're, just acting like Kevin O'Connell is just going to show up and just turn him into Matthew Stafford last year. So I like that. Nobody ever talks about the downside there. Pat, same question to you. Aaron Rodgers, Justin Fields, Kirk Cousins, keep, trade, cut.
Well, I got to keep Aaron Rodgers, of course.
Of course.
I'd
expect
Packers
nothing
homer.
less.
I'd trade Justin Fields and hope people, buy into the upside of the young QB. And I'm cutting Kirk Cousins, who I've always kind of felt he was a mediocre quarterback masquerading as like a league average or above average starter. Like if you've got 3rd and 8, no one will more reliably complete a 7-yard pass than Kirk Cousins in the NFL. I just and I know I have friends in Minnesota who, like, a lot of Vikings fans get on my case when I rip on Cousins, but like my Vikings fans friends in Minnesota can't stand him. So, and I think they're pretty discerning judges of football talent, and they kind of see what I see too. So.
Yeah, I mean, people have just crowned Kirk Cousins as an automatic QB1 this year already. I'm with you guys. I was kind of shocked to hear both of you cut Kirk Cousins because that's ranking these guys. I'd have done the same thing, but I'm in agreement with you there. Let's talk about running backs a little bit, and this one might be a little bit of a layup. I think I kind of know at least who the cut guy is going to be here, but pickings were kind of slim here. So Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift, David Montgomery, Pat, keep, trade, cut.
Keep Aaron Jones, trade DeAndre Swift just because I think he has more trade value than Aaron Jones. He's going a little higher in drafts, and good to know that you guys are a little not that high on Montgomery. I wasn't sure how this was going to go over, but yeah, I'd cut him. I just think they're heading toward a committee, and I've got Tristan Ebner teed up in a deep draft. I'm hoping he lasts to me actually with this next pick, but and Herbert, I think this is headed toward a committee.
Yeah, it's it seems like just about every Bears fan I know that's in the fantasy community dislikes David Montgomery. I mean, you got your meatball fans in Chicago that just love every single guy that wears navy and orange. But once you start looking into the advanced numbers, there really isn't a lot to get excited about with David Montgomery. So I do like the call out too that you're going to trade DeAndre Swift because he currently has more value, because DeAndre Swift is getting drafted ahead of Aaron Jones. And that's kind of a tough one for me. When I look at those guys, they project very similarly for their roles in the offense, where they're going to be sharing a backfield, doing a lot of the pass catching work. So I think that's really where the decision is Aaron Jones and DeAndre Swift. Nick, because I believe that you are probably cutting David Montgomery as well. So let's hear what you got to say about this.
Yeah, 100%. That wasn't a really tough stretch there. I would flip it, and I would keep Swift, and I would trade Aaron Jones for a couple of reasons. One, I really love A.J. Dillon, and that's a guy I didn't like coming out of college, and I like when guys improve and prove me wrong. I think that's fun to watch players evolve and their usage too, and I think Green Bay really develops talent well. I think that might be their kind of secret over the years. But Aaron Jones gets dinged up. I know Swift missed some time last year. Jones has gotten dinged up. He's closer to the age cliff. I mean, you never know when things could fall off. And the other thing too, and this is just for dynasty purposes, I think this is his last year in Green Bay, just due to that contract. And Pat, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm gonna keep the younger guy who's probably going to be closer to his prime and healthier.
I don't know if you guys watched this week's episode of Hard Knocks yet, but the way that Deuce Staley is coaching DeAndre Swift gets me really excited. I mean, just he's kind of got that Saquon Barkley problem right now, where he just wants to dance behind the goal or behind the line of scrimmage and look for that big play. And Deuce Staley is just you got to cut it inside, you got to hit the hole, and that's what was really missing from his game last year. So I'm hoping that he can add that to his repertoire as well. Now let's talk about the tight ends. We've already talked about two of these guys a little bit on this show: Robert Tonyan, Cole Kmet, and Irv Smith is the one guy we haven't talked about yet. So Nick, start us off here. Keep, trade, cut. Robert Tonyan, Irv Smith, Cole Kmet.
Well, for this year, obviously, I'm going to keep Tonyan because I keep talking him up. I like him I like him more than Cole Kmet. And even as a Bears fan, there are parts of his game that I don't necessarily love. And when I want to look at the difference between the passing between Rodgers and Fields, I think I'm going to give him the nod there. And I'm going to trade Kmet because I think he's got a little bit more value. And I'm going to cut Irv Smith. Even though I like him, the injury and plus this facade that Minnesota's offense is just going to automatically be awesome, I just don't necessarily believe it.
Yeah, there's definitely some risk there. And if I recall, I'm pretty sure that Irv Smith already got a little nicked up in camp. I mean, that's just been the theme of his career so far. But Pat, same question to you. Cole Kmet, Robert Tonyan, Irv Smith, keep, trade, cut.
I really like Nick's line of thinking on this, in that, Kmet does have the most value, but darn, I want to keep him. Like, I want to see what develops with Cole Kmet. So I guess I'm keeping him, trading Tonyan, and cutting Irv Smith. And with the enthusiasm for Irv Smith, I'm just kind of not really on board with. We just haven't seen enough yet for me to draft him. And I know it's like tight end 16 or whatever he's going at. Like, it's not that steep a price, but I think there are other guys I'd rather take shots on at that point.
Yeah, agree with all of that. Now for the fun one, we're going to talk about the wide receivers, and obviously I had to omit Justin Jefferson because that would just make this wildly unfair. So we're going to be looking at the wide receiver 2 for the Vikings, and I'm talking about Adam Thielen, of course. So Allen Lazard, Darnell Mooney, or Adam Thielen. Keep, trade, cut. Nick, start us off.
Yeah, this one I think is going to be the most fun conversation. I'm going to keep Darnell Mooney because I think he's going to get 150 plus targets. He's already had this rapport with Fields last year, but all offseason they have been clicking and things have been going well there. I think he's going to put up great numbers. And I'm going to trade Adam Thielen. And it's because I think you still could get some people that love that touchdown production that he's had and get some value there. And I just don't think people are valuing Allen Lazard like we kind of all are. So I think he's got to get cut, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's so tough for me to have a take on Adam Thielen because I don't know. Like, he could fall off the age cliff and he could keep doing what he's been doing for the last few years and defying age and touchdown regression and still putting up great numbers. So it's kind of tough for me to have a strong take on Adam Thielen. Because really, I mean, his range of outcomes is just so wide. So I like all that. But Fitz, same question to you. Lazard, Mooney, Thielen, keep, trade, cut.
I'm keeping Mooney too, and I just drafted him maybe an hour before I came on with you guys in a flex league draft, and as my third wide receiver, and I think the 5th round. I really love the guy. I do think he's in line for a big target share. And shout out to one of my followers, this woman named Anissa, who went to Tulane and was like, this guy's pretty good, I think. And, I hadn't watched many Tulane games. I didn't know a lot about Mooney. And, she was very right. He's terrific. I'm going to trade Allen Lazard. I'm going to trade him to one of you guys because I know you'll give me fair value. You guys are such big fans. And I'm going to cut Thielen, I don't know, maybe he can keep scoring touchdowns, but we saw him have the lowest yards per catch and yards per route run of his career last year. Maybe he is teetering pretty close to that age cliff.
It's coming for all of us at some point in time. But one thing I want to say about Mooney and Pat, I don't know if you had a chance to watch the preseason game. I doubt you were watching the first quarter of preseason football for the Chicago Bears, but they had this one play that was beautiful. We've been hearing about it all offseason that Justin Fields and Mooney have been working together, and Mooney kind of faked a cut inside, and while he was cutting inside, Fields just floated a ball up to the outside and just read it beautifully. A nice little contested catch in the air by Mooney. I mean, that chemistry that they've been raving about all offseason seemed to translate quickly onto the field. So that one play alone kind of made me revisit my been fading Darnell Mooney all offseason. I saw that one play and I said, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Trying not to overreact, but also getting pretty excited as a Bears fan. But fellas, this was a fantastic conversation, loaded with awesome information for the viewers and listeners here. Before we sign off, though, Pat, one more time, why don't you go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you on social media and where they can find all of your content.
Yeah, on Twitter, I am at Fitz_FF. All my stuff is at fantasypros.com. And Dave, thanks again for having me. Great being on with you and Nick. This was a fun conversation.
Yeah, you're a friend of the show at this point now. This is your second time on the launch pad. So standing invite, Pat, you can come on whenever you'd like. Nick, same over to you, though. Let everyone know where they can find you on social media and what you are going to be working on.
Yeah, at _Nick Whalen. My stuff will be at Footballguys, and then I'll have a YouTube channel. And I agree with Pat. I thought we might have some kind of clashing NFC North thing, but we've just been too honest, and we're just like, well, we like guys on all of our teams because we want to win in fantasy football. That's the point. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
Of course. Yeah, it felt like every time I did an NFC North preview, somebody would invite me on a guest spot this offseason. I'd hop into that StreamYard link, and it would be Pat's face. I mean, Pat and I, we've been talking NFC North all offseason, so glad that we get to do it a couple of weeks before the season kicks off. I, of course, am Dave Kluge. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge, all my written and video content at Footballguys. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube page at youtube.com/footballguys. Thank you so much for checking this episode out, and we will see you next week. Thank you for watching. If you have not already, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page. You can find that at youtube.com/footballguys. Give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down based on how you felt about the show, and leave a comment below if you got anything to add. Thank you so much for checking this out, and I'll catch you next week.